Hi, my name's Karen Kelly, and my presentation for this week is the CSS Specificity. Apart from float, CSS Specificity is one of the most difficult concepts to grasp in cascading style sheets. So what is CSS Specificity? If we look at the quote from the MDN web docs, specificity is the means by which the browsers decide which CSS property values are the most relevant to an element and therefore will be applied. Specificity is based on matching rules which are composed of different sorts of CSS selectors. That makes no sense to me, and so I did extra digging and found a journal blog by Journey J. And after reading through that, I discovered specificity is a system designed to decide which CSS rule is applied to the web page. If more than one selector applies to the same element, the one with the higher specificity rules, and the selectors that have equal specificity value, the rule implements the last one. Let's give you a little bit of an overview. Each selector is assigned a spot on the hierarchy in the CSS specificity. If there's more than one selector that applies to the same element, the selector with the highest specificity will be applied first. When more than one selector applies to an element and both selectors have the same specificity, the one that was written last will be the one that applies. So let's look at the font. When you put in your font, let's say you put it in, you really like it, and then you find another one that you like even better and you put it in, and they're identical as far as your CSS goes. The specificity is going to choose the one that you put in last and not look at the first one. When the selectors have an unequal value, the specific rule will apply, and the more specific selectors, the greater the specificity. Some other information, when you're working with your sheets, with your cascading sheets and style sheets and your main sheet, one of the reasons why they don't work as well is because the CSS rules do not allow them to follow through. The embedded style sheet has more specificity than the other rules. And the ID selectors are in specificity at attribute selectors. The class selector overrides many element selectors. IDs should be used to increase specificity, and the universal selector and the inherited selectors have a specificity of 0, 0, 0, 0. We'll explain those zeros in a sec. So let's look at calculating specificity. When you're calculating specificity, there are four main categories that define the parts that the selectors fit in. And when you look on the internet to find a calculator, you can use the formal ones, or you could use a different one, or one that you choose. So I found one that was a Star Wars one. I prefer to use the royal hierarchy with the kings and the queens because that seems to fit in a little bit easier with the specificity hierarchy and helps me keep things straighter. So I have my king, and he will include a style item that's located on the HTML part of the document. And this is an example, it's the style one. Now notice there is a color on here. We are going to ignore that color for the time being and just look at the style. This has a specificity of 1000 or 1000. The queen are your IDs, identifiers or page elements, and these are your divs, and their specificity is 100. Prince and princesses include your classes, attributes, and pseudo classes, and that of course has your classes, hover, focus, links, first childs, and they have a specificity of 10. And then your duke and duchess include the elements and pseudo elements with the colon of after and before, and the colors as an excellent example for that one. and it has a specificity of 1. And let's look at a calculator and some calculation examples. When you look at the calculators, you think that you're going to find a calculator, but it's really just a page with a formula on it. This is a formal one, and it's got your inline, it's got your CSS, it's got your ID, it's got your class, pseudo class, your element, and it also gives you room to put your zeros and put your numbers in, and we'll explain those here a sec. This is just another one that's a formal one. This one is the one that I did to show you examples. I have my first example here, and this is your style. It's got your H1 and it's got your style. And so when you go to put your numbers in, each time you have a style, you get a 1. So if you had more than one style in this line, you would have more than one 1. Or if you had extra stuff in there. Now this one has the style, so it gets a 1, but it does not have an ID in it, so that has a 0. It does not have a class, so that gets a 0. However, the color is an element, and so that element gets a 1. So its total is a 1, 0, 0, 1. Your div is your ID. It does not have an inline style, so it has a 0. Your ID gets a 1. It does not have a class with it or an element with it, so they both have zeros. Your total is 0, 1, 0, 0. The next one is the note. Up a little bit. And the note has the dot in front of it, which is your class. This is your class one. And it does not have an inline style. There's a 0. It does not have an ID, another 0. It does have the class, so that gets a 1. It does not have an element attached to it, so that's a 0. Your total is 0, 0, 1, 0, or 10. And then your color, and is a green. And this is an example of the element. It does not have an inline style or ID or class, so those are all zeros. It does have your element, so it's a 1. So you have a 0, 0, 0, 1. Now this one is one that I put on because I wanted to show you. If you notice, it has the color red. It's also got the paragraph, which means the lettering on your paragraph is going to be red. This one tells you that it has a yellow background. So you're going to have red letters on a yellow background. Now you don't have a style, you don't have the ID or class, so all those are zeros. You have two elements, one for color, one for background. So you have a 0, 0, 0, 2, or a 2. But you've written another line. They've put a line there that has another paragraph, and its color is going to be purple. So you are going to have purple letters. So you're going to have 0, 0, 0, 1 because it's got one element. Now look at this very closely. Your color purple and your color red are exactly the same. So here's the question. Are you going to have red letters on a yellow background, or are you going to have purple letters? Because the purple is the second one or the last one written, you're going to have purple letters. However, the background is not down here, so you're going to have purple letters on a yellow background. Well, there always has to be an exception. So the two exceptions that we have are the not important and the not exception. And there's an example here highlighted in yellow with the not important. So it's saying that the height is not important. So they say always try another way. Try to use anything you can instead of the not important. Only use it when you're overriding a foreign CSS using it as an external libraries. Don't ever use it when you're writing plugin, mashup, or site-wide CSS, excuse me. And instead, consider making a better use of your CSS cascading properties or using a more specific rule. This really causes problems for you. It says It is bad practice and should be avoided because it makes debugging more difficult by breaking down the natural cascading in your style sheets. Now on the not the negation pseudo-class not is not considered a pseudo-class in the specificity calculation. But selectors placed into the negation pseudo-class count as normal selectors when determining the count on selector types. And the selector types is an H1 type. So this concludes my presentation. We have gone over the definition of CSS specificity. We've given you an overview of specificity. We've shown you calculations and examples of calculations, and we've talked about a few exceptions. So if you have any questions, feel free to put them in and I will do my very best to answer them. And have a great day.